This podcast is brought to you by Anchor Podcasts. Have you yourself ever wanted to be a podcaster? Well, Anchor makes it simple and easy for you to start today. Download their app on your iPhone or Android device and go through their step-by-step process from recording all the way through distribution. Visit their website, anchor.fm, or download the app on your Android or iPhone device today. That's Anchor Podcast. What's up, guys? Travis Fowler, Arkwriter, back again with another edition of the Four Corner Podcast. And it is just about a little over 12 hours or so removed from the Elimination Chamber pay-per-view event, or premium live event, as we call them now. And I gotta say that I kind of relate to a lot of what's being said about the Elimination Chamber pay-per-view. Overall, I enjoyed the show very much. I thought Elimination Chamber, from a bottom to top event, was very well done. A lot of which was thanks in part to the Montreal crowd that was hot for that entire show, almost from beginning to end. I say almost because of how the main event went, which I'll get to in a second. But the women's chamber match was excellent. The men's chamber match, also excellent. The Brock Lesnar-Bobby Lashley match is a match that I said from the get-go should have been a WrestleMania match. And if you kept up with what I was talking about a couple weeks back about what I felt could make that match bigger and make it feel more different than what the other two were, because let's face it, the other two matches between the two of them weren't exactly the best, but they were passable for what you needed. But what about the finality? What about that one match that's going to set it off and just leave that impression that, okay, this was a good way to cap off the rivalry? I had said that save it for Mania and put some MMA rules to it because of the background of both men. And it could be just a one-off situation that you could do Lashley and Lesnar in an MMA style matchup. Legit, like let it be a legit match. They would have had 6 weeks to train for the fight, and everybody would have made a little bit of extra penny, and it would have added a new variety into the pro wrestling landscape, especially with it being WrestleMania. But I digress. It was what it was, and it just had a very weird finish to it. I don't really understand exactly what they were trying to accomplish with that, because obviously fans loved Lesnar, and even after the disqualification finish, they still cheered for him over Lashley more than anything. But I just think that finality, if that is indeed the last Bobby Lashley, Brock Lesnar match, that left a very funky taste in my mouth, and I think it could have been handled better. But I digress and move forward. I think, surprise match of the night, if you want to even call it that, was the mixed tag match with Edge and Beth Phoenix taking on Judgment Day's Finn Balor and Rhea Ripley. The match was excellent. Everybody did exactly what they were supposed to. Everybody was on point for their performance last night. And Edge and Beth Phoenix getting the win is something I predicted. I still don't think we're done quite yet with Judgment Day. Of course, we saw Edge in the press conference say he was going to answer Austin Theory's U.S. title open challenge for tomorrow night. I'm recording this on a Sunday morning, so that would be actually tonight's matchup for the U.S. title, Austin Theory versus Edge. And I suspect that we're going to get some Judgment Day involvement in that match. And I think that's going to what will set off Balor and Edge's build for Mania for the final matchup between Judgment Day and Edge. And if reports were true about the Rumble, now pushing it to Mania, Hell in the Cell between Balor and Edge could be very special. And I just enjoyed the match overall. Again, the crowd had a lot to do with last night's event just being a great pay-per-view, or again, there we go again, premium live event. And they really sold just about every single match that you can actually put on that card. The main event, though, is what everybody wanted. Sami Zayn versus Roman Reigns. Everybody was waiting for that matchup. We got the match. It did not go the way I thought it would, ending-wise. Overall ending, I said Roman was going to retain the Undisputed Championship. But the manner in which it was done is not what I expected. As a matter of fact, I found it a little clunky and left me scratching my head a little bit. Jey Uso's involvement at the end of the match was, I don't know where they're going to go with it. And I think that is a good selling point to get me to tune in to watch. But at the same time, I'm left with a lot of questions more so than answers, you know. I just don't quite have the idea of where they're going. It almost feels like they're going to have Jey Uso implode well before Mania even. And I don't know if this may be the backup plan to what was supposed to be The Rock versus Roman. And maybe this is where we get payoff for Jey Uso, which is something I don't think anybody's really talked about, at least not from WrestleMania's sake. But are they building towards Jey Uso versus Roman Reigns? I don't know. It kind of gives off vibes that that's where they want to go. And yet in the same breath, if that is where they end up going, I don't know how much people would appreciate that, especially at the expense of Sami Zayn. Because then what's there for Sami? What's there for Kevin Owens? What's there for the Usos? Obviously, we would know where Jey Uso's going, but what about his brother Jimmy? And they have the tag titles. So could it be a situation where they defend the titles one night and then Jey faces Roman the next night? Or I don't know how this is going to go. And again, I guess that goes to their credit, WWE's that is, of making you tune in to find out what happens next. But I think when you get a little bit more questions than what you have answers, sometimes it can turn people away from what you would initially hope they would do instead. But I guess time will tell, and we'll find out more maybe Monday. I would say more than likely we'll find out a lot more on Friday night. But yeah, I'm still here for it. I think, again, the overall pay-per-view or premium live event, it's so hard to get used to calling them that after calling them pay-per-views for 20 plus years. But overall, I agree with a sentiment I saw about the Chamber. And as a whole, I would say that Elimination Chamber was great. It just didn't quite stick the landing. And I know a lot of people would have loved for Sami to win the championship. As I have said for the last couple weeks now, that was not going to be the case. Sami Zayn put on a hell of a performance, though. That's emotional storytelling in that match, no questions about it. And I still stand by my statement that I made last week that I do believe Sami Zayn does have a WWE title run in his future, and probably pretty soon at that. I just don't think right now is that time. I don't think that's his spot. Cody Rhodes is primed and ready to take that championship and to be the perennial babyface for WWE. He did an interview with Ariel Helwani actually this week that actually lends to a statement I made a couple weeks back, which was I felt Cody Rhodes was going to be what WWE's answer for a lack of a John Cena would be, in that Cody would be that new John Cena face, if you will. He'll be the guy that goes on the interview press tours. He'll be the guy that has the WWE banner flying high and representing the company well. And as it turns out, he mentioned briefly in his interview with Helwani that Cody used to drive John around in Cody's early phase of his career, and that made me really stop and think that Cody's been picking John Cena's brain during that time and just taking everything that he learned and he applied it to his career during his initial WWE run. I would even argue outside of his WWE run, still keeping a very professional stance when it comes to even the independent scene. And now that he's come back to WWE, I feel more confident than ever that Cody Rhodes is indeed the face of WWE and will be, I believe, for at least the next foreseeable 3 years. I think it could even go longer than that, but this is Cody's time. This is Cody's opportunity to show that he is the star he believed he was from the get-go. In other news, though, a lot of free agents are either coming up on the market for wrestling or just have been kind of waiting to see what happens in professional wrestling. New Japan Strong held their Battle at the Valley event last night as well on a super late showing. It was after Elimination Chamber, which they were holding that event over on the West Coast. So I'm in the Central Time Zone here in the United States. So on the West Coast time zone, they are 2 hours behind what the Central Time Zone is. Just to give an example, right now it's right about the 10 a.m. mark here in Central Time Zone. And over in the West Coast, it would be about 8 a.m. So I think the event started I believe it was maybe 10 or 11 p.m. Over here in the Central Time. So it would have been about 8 or 9 that event started over on the West Coast. But a couple notable things took place on that match. On that card. The first that was notable was indeed Jay White losing to Eddie Kingston in a loser leaves Japan match. So not only did Jay White leave Japan as in New Japan, but then he came over and did battle with Eddie Kingston and lost that match. So now, without a doubt, Jay White is 100% free of New Japan obligations and has now hit the open market. Also from that match, we saw Mercedes Moné, formerly known as Sasha Banks, defeat Kairi and become the new IWGP Women's Champion. This is her first step, Moné being her first step towards the WWE Independent Tour, if you want to call that, meaning she has now left the E and is spreading her wings all over the indie scene and showing that she is the draw that she always believed she was, that I believe she was even. I have not watched the match in its entirety yet. Obviously, I just know the results. But I do plan on watching it. I've heard mixed reviews, mostly on the positive side of that match, that it was a 25 or 27 minute classic. So I actually look forward to watching it and seeing how everything played out between Kairi and Mercedes Moné. And I really do think Moné is taking her first step to prove that she is the star that maybe WWE didn't think she was. Good for her. I love that she banked on herself, no pun intended. I'm a fan of anybody that does that. So I think right now, Mercedes is putting herself in the best position that she possibly can, taking the Cody Rhodes route, if you will, leaving the WWE to show how big of a star she is. And it won't surprise me if, I'd say in the next 3 years, maybe even 4, if we see a return of Sasha Banks. But right now, that's neither here nor there. She's doing great and having fun in professional wrestling, which is what I hope for anybody that gets into this business. But anyway, back to the subject at hand. We've got Jay White, who's a free agent, Kota Ibushi, who is a free agent, Nick Aldis, a free agent, and 2 acts that are rumoredly, well, one of them I think is already a free agent, calling himself an indie god as it is, that being Matt Cardona. And then coming up soon, by the looks of it, is the contracts of the team of FTR. Obviously, Dax Harwood kind of created a little bit of a stir when he posted a picture on his Twitter, I think it was a week ago, that had the hint of what some speculated was a WWE contract. And it could have been that because it was then later deleted by Dax. But maybe we were reading a little bit more into this. He kind of put that rumor to bed on his podcast, stating that, he was just watching some wrestling and just took a picture and realized that there was some speculation that went on from said picture. I think it's a good cover if it is indeed the truth. Or I guess if you want to say, I guess he would be putting out a false statement just to cover what the real truth is, and it would be passable. But Dax Harwood seems to be the guy who's a straight shooter. So I would be one to take it at his word that maybe it was just that, a complete and total accident. I would be more apt to believe that. But nevertheless, their contracts are coming up. So of the free agents, Jay White, Kota Ibushi, FTR coming soon, Nick Aldis, and Matt Cardona. Where do I think some of these guys could fit if they decide to take a chance and sign a contract with one of the two major promotions, or arguably three with Impact Wrestling, because Impact Wrestling does contracts as well? And for instance, Matt Cardona's been doing Impact Wrestling. There's a lot of rumors and speculation that he could be coming to the E to join his wife, Chelsea Green. And I think that is a very likely possibility considering his history with WWE. Seems to be more and more likely that we're going to see that take place. It won't surprise me if he goes back there. And I know he's already voiced several times that he believes he would not want to come back under the Zack Ryder gimmick, but more so come back as just being Matt Cardona. And I kind of think he has a point to do that. No matter what anybody says about Matt Cardona, especially me, who had a go around with him on Twitter about a month or two ago, he has reinvented himself and has made himself a prominent name in independent wrestling. No question about it. And if he goes back to WWE, I think it would be a little bit of a big deal, especially because how over he got himself over 10 years ago. To see him come back now and have the independent resume that he would have, along with that skill of getting himself to a prominent name like he did in 2011 and like he has done on his indie run, I do believe that he would be worthy of keeping the Matt Cardona name, obviously it being his, but taking that persona and putting it onto the WWE landscape. I think he's earned it. I don't think he would need to go back to the Zack Ryder character. And he's even expressed he'd want to do a cinematic match that would kill off the Zack Ryder character altogether and just leave none other than Matt Cardona. I think he's earned that. So if he does indeed go back to WWE, I hope he does keep the Matt Cardona persona alive on that next run. Do I think he fits best in the E? Absolutely. What are some other places that I feel like some of these guys could go? Let's start Jay White. Jay White is a guy who obviously has history with a lot of New Japan guys that are now in AEW. AEW has a good relationship with New Japan, so it seems like a natural transition. But there's also some WWE connections, mainly the Bullet Club connections. You've got Cody Rhodes, who was there, AJ Styles, who was there, Doc Gallows, Carl Anderson. The Good Brothers obviously would be a good reason for Jay White to go to WWE. There's already several different feuds you could have with Jay White on the main roster with WWE. We mentioned it with AJ Styles and the Good Brothers being there. You could easily do an angle where the Good Brothers betray AJ Styles and go with Jay White, since they were tight, they being Jay and the Good Brothers, before they re-signed with WWE, and even during that time where Carl Anderson did his little run with New Japan. And there's a natural story there. You could even do something with Finn Balor, who was the founder of Bullet Club. So you would have its most recent leader taking on its original leader. AJ Styles is also a former leader. So there's a lot that you could actually do story-wise with just those two people, or four if you include the group, the Good Brothers, there's a lot there. So there's a lot of possibilities for Jay White. And if you're asking me, I personally think Jay White would do better signing with WWE. I think there would be a lot more opportunity for him to show how much of a good storyteller he is. He's already proven he's a great in-ring worker. His promos are solid. His stories, when he has been put into a great program, has shown that he can hang with the best. Kenny Omega comes to mind there. He had a great title run and match series with Kazuchika Okada. He can go. So overall, though, I think his skill sets would be best fit for the WWE. Now, Kota Ibushi, on the other hand, as much as I would think he could do well in WWE, unfortunately, history hasn't been kind to Japanese famed wrestlers with the Japanese roots. Kenta, who competed in WWE under Hideo Itami, is the first that kind of comes to mind there. Then you could look even farther back with Kai and Tai and how they were treated as a joke gimmick. Jimmy Wang Yang kind of in the same way, even though some of those gimmicks were very entertaining. There just isn't a lot of success for somebody from Japan to come over and do well in WWE. Kushida is another prime example of that. And for Kota Ibushi, I do think AEW would be his better fit there. One of his best friends, being Kenny Omega, is there currently. You could easily throw him into a program with him. You could throw him in with the Bucks. Takeshita is there now, who's doing great, and I have pronounced his name correctly this time. Kota Ibushi has a lot more options and level of success that I think he could be matched with more signing with AEW over anybody else. So Kota would be the best fit to go to AEW as opposed to anywhere else, in my opinion. FTR, I think the writing is almost on the wall that they are WWE bound at this point. AEW has treated them very well. They've had a great run with AEW. I just also think they have misstepped over the last year or so with FTR. Had it not been for the trilogy of matches with the Briscoes, it's one of those things that makes me wonder if they would have even had much of a presence on AEW television over the last year. Obviously, with the rise of the Acclaimed and several other factors, I just think we've seen FTR take a little bit of a back seat, and that's not where they want to be. So I really think they are maybe showing signs, or maybe have even vocally said that they have been frustrated with some of the creative direction. And Dax Harwood went on record earlier this week, again, stating that he would like to come back to wrestling before April, if Tony Khan wants him to. So we'll see how this plays out. I think at this point, FTR really should consider going back to WWE. I think they've proven that they are one of the best tag team commodities around today. And they proved that as being a legit revival team. That was their name. They have shown that they are indeed what they are. And they are one of the best teams in professional wrestling. And I think right now you're seeing a rebuild of the tag team division inside WWE right now with a little bit more prominence than what we were used to, especially with the Usos holding the championships right now. You could easily put them into a program with the Usos right after Mania, and it would be a killer feud. And it'd be a way to put FTR, I would assume they would go back to being called a Revival, right back on the map in WWE with a huge feud and win over the current tag team champions if they are still champions after Mania. This next guy is a wild card because I think there's a couple places that he could fit very well in, and then there's a place that I don't think would know how to use him. Nick Aldis, the National Treasure, did all he could to make the NWA a prominent company. And arguably, NWA has been brought to a level of prominence since the Billy Corgan acquisition a few years back. Obviously, the pandemic put a lot of things, especially the NWA, back, but they've slowly been trying to put some more notification on themselves for being something to watch. Nick Aldis, unfortunately, was not going to be part of those foreseeable plans in the NWA. So now with him being a free agent, a lot of people wonder where he'll go. I think he could go back to Impact Wrestling, but I think maybe in his mind, it's a been there, done that situation. He does have his wife, the current Knockouts champion, Mickie James, there. So that seems like a quick tie-in where you could easily put him right back into the Impact Wrestling fold. And there's a lot of great talent over there. Jonathan Gresham and Josh Alexander being two guys right off the bat that you could have great feuds with. But I think for where his level is in-ring wise, storytelling wise, between AEW and WWE, if he signs with a big promotion, I would think he would do much better to go and have a WWE run. Nick Aldis could fit in very well with the WWE. And something that just occurred to me, you could put him into a program eventually, or if you wanted to put him on the map as being a big-time star rather quickly, put him up against Cody. We all have a feeling, and I am going to go with this feeling, that Cody's going to become champion after WrestleMania. What better way to put the national treasure on a national platform than to put him up against brand new WWE champion Cody Rhodes, the same guy who beat him at the All In event for the NWA Heavyweight Championship. Storytelling at its finest could be done with that. Nick Aldis really would do very well, in my opinion, with the WWE. On the other side of that coin, I think he'd be another guy that's just lost in the AEW roster shuffle. I think he would be a big deal for maybe a month, like a lot of guys have become, and then you wouldn't see much of him, or you would hear very little from him at that point. And I could be wrong about that. Maybe Tony Khan has more of a respect for Nick Aldis and the hustle that he did for trying to resurrect the NWA brand. But I just think if you're looking at overall potential, much to the same as what I said about Jay White, Nick Aldis can fill a lot of those boxes as well. So I think Nick Aldis has much more opportunities with WWE than he does with AEW. Couple more notes for just fun anecdotes for wrestling. The Hurt Business is rumoredly coming back, and I think that would be something that we would see take place after WrestleMania. This close to Mania, you don't really want to introduce new stories, especially because WrestleMania is looked at as like the season finale for the last year of WWE. But a good way to start off the new season is bringing back a stable that I think a lot of people would agree disbanded way too soon. And they've even talked about adding a couple new members into it. So if we have the Hurt Business come back, the original Hurt Business was the four members of MVP, Bobby Lashley, Cedric Alexander, and Shelton Benjamin, with MVP playing more so of the manager to the other three. I still like the idea of MVP being the manager and only using him sparingly wrestling-wise, because you could easily build a new Hurt Business with the following people. And this includes the rumored name that has been talked about to be added as well: Bobby Lashley, Cedric Alexander, Shelton Benjamin, Omos. As much as people may want to kind of diss on that, he's got the MVP relation, and he could fit well as like the big heavy for the group. And the final member, Carmelo Hayes. You would have 5 guys under the MVP tutelage, and I think all 5 of them could benefit very well from MVP. he has shown that he is a great mouthpiece. And of all of those 5, the one who has the most charisma out of them is Carmelo Hayes, in my opinion, at least from what we've seen in NXT. So even though he's got that credential, MVP, I think, is just above him when it comes to promos. Let him be the mouthpiece for all 5 guys. You know, it would work swimmingly well, and I think you could build a great Hurt Business faction off of those 6 individuals. And I think that's something we might want to keep an eye on following WrestleMania. But one other thing I wanted to mention, and this kind of goes towards The Miz more than anything. Anybody see that half-court shot of The Miz when he actually had the celebrity basketball game? Dude, from half-court shot it, and if it would have counted, it would have been absolutely astonishing. But just a millisecond too late to release the ball from his hand, and it null void the actual shot made. But don't take away from the fact that that man stood on a half-court and made the shot. Unbelievable footage. If you haven't seen it, just go on the social medias and look at it, because it was absolutely amazing. Speaking of a sports situation, XFL kicked off last night, and I was more than happy to see it come back. I was a fan that came back during the 2020 season, and I really liked the changes that they had made to the game overall. They kept a lot of those same nuances with this new 2023 XFL. Still a Renegades fan, and overall it was a great presentation. And if they continue on this route, not only will we get an actual completed season this time around, as opposed to 2020, but I think we could see more than just the one season like we saw in 2001, and XFL could be something to keep an eye on. Fans were showing up for the game, not just the afternoon, but the evening game as well. So I think XFL has a bright future ahead of it. Guys, that's all I got for professional wrestling talk these days. And I love chatting wrestling. I love every single one of you that have subscribed to the channel over the last week, that have watched the shorts that are uploaded to the channel. It is greatly appreciated. Please continue to send your friends over. Subscribe to the channel, because it really does help us out, and make sure you follow us on all of our social media platforms. And the more follows we get, the more subscribers we get, the more content I am coming up with to add to the channel. As I've stated before, I'm going to be looking at doing interviews coming up here pretty soon. And I've had a couple people ask me about my mic setup. Currently, I'm using a lapel microphone that is hooked to my rod that you see in front of me. And if you want the link for that product and the type of mic I'm using, I will put it down in the link description below. And honestly, I kind of enjoy with the setup I have here, because I'll use these same microphones when I do interviews too. It just so happens it works well for what I'm using it for now as a little clip-on. I know some people have been ragging on that over the last few months or so, but hey, at least I'm not holding it, so there's that. But hey, again, continue to subscribe to the channel, like all of our videos, share them around, tell your friends about us, and make sure that you listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Anchor Podcasts. Watch the videos on YouTube. You guys have been amazing. I love pro wrestling, love chatting pro wrestling with all the fans out there. So please enjoy wrestling this week. I'll be back next week to talk more wrestling and continue to love pro wrestling. See y'all then.